Hi, everyone. I'll be reacting to Candace Owens interviewing Norman Finkelstein and he knows a lot about Israel, Gaza, and etc. and everything that happened in the Middle East region there, and all the stuff that happened there in Israel and Gaza. So let's watch it. See what he has to say.
Magazine. It describes Gaza as, quote, a human rubbish heap. The leading UN official on Gaza describes it as, quote, a toxic dump. For the people of Israel, Gazans are vermin. They're garbage. They're human refuse.
You guys were the ones that insisted that we all have a perspective on October 7th. Then when we looked and we pierced that veil, we went, oh my goodness, how was I ever pro-Israel? And now you want us to shut up.
There's a problem here. A billionaire class of Jewish supremacists are now flagrantly using money as a blackmail weapon to silence not just criticism of Jews, but silence criticism of an ongoing genocide.
Oh, crazy.
All right.
So, first things, look, Israel might be doing some crap that's very insane there in Gaza. But still, I don't hate either of those countries. Gaza, not really a country. Some consider it to be a country, some don't. But I think both of them should just have peace. Like, even if it's not war with the USA or doesn't involve the USA, I just don't like war. Like, if Gaza and Israel could just make peace, quit killing each other, quit committing genocide or Genoslide, then that would be cool. But I guess not how it is. And if America would just see Israel as any other country, like, I don't hate Israel, okay? I don't hate the country.
All right, you guys, I am super excited about this conversation. Where do I begin? I'll just begin with my personal experience. October 7th took place, and I remember immediately after there was sort of this peer pressure campaign to get everybody to make a statement about what had happened in Israel. And frankly, I was happy to make a statement about how tragic those events were, but I couldn't actually make a statement regarding why these events took place. I didn't know what had happened prior to that day. I didn't know the history of the modern state of Israel. And when I began what I would call an honest inquiry into the history of the modern state of Israel, I felt that I was basically in a pressure cooker. People that I thought were my friends were telling me not to pursue this route. I didn't comprehend what they meant when they said not to pursue this route. They were calling me names, saying that I was flirting with anti-Semitism by wanting to read books and speak to people that were on the opposite side of that issue. And I got into a lot of trouble, and I mean a lot of trouble, for my friends, when I hosted person who is now sitting across from me, Norm Finkelstein, on my previous show. And the things that he told me about Gaza were shocking. It was especially shocking because this wasn't from someone that they could easily describe as anti-Semitic, giving us history, which he's going to tell you about today. Very important discussion. And he's also an individual that I thought, quite strangely, none of the people who were peer pressuring me were willing to debate. If Norm Finkelstein is wrong, and he could be, why wouldn't the most prominent voices of the pro-Israel debate be willing to sit down with him and have that discussion? We're going to figure out why. Norm Finkelstein, welcome.
People that are usually wrong sometimes they don't want to have a debate. They just don't care. They want to have a debate just to see each other's opinions or what they think. They just don't care. They'll call you names and they don't want to debate you. That's how those kind of people are. People that they know they're wrong or whatever, or they think you're wrong, and they just don't want to debate you or anything, and they just call you names. That's what they do usually.
My show, actually mine, totally owned by me. I can host you here.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show.
So just in case my audience has not been introduced to you, I would first just sort of like you to, and we're going to get to your books, which are amazing, to kind of tell them your backstory and your credentials and what happened despite the fact that you were so credentialed.
The backstory is there's a personal element and there is a professional element. The personal element is that I am the son of survivors of the Nazi Holocaust. Both my parents were in what was called the Warsaw Ghetto. The Warsaw Ghetto was repressed after an uprising in April 1943. There were about 20 to 30,000 survivors of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, and they were deported to Majdanek concentration camp. And both my father and my mother were deported to Majdanek. My mother ended up in 2 slave labor camps after Majdanek, and my father ended up in Auschwitz, and he was in the Auschwitz Death March. Every member of my family, apart from my mother and father, on both sides, everybody was exterminated. There were no aunts, there were no uncles, there were no grandparents, there was nothing. And my parents were, for reasons not worth going into now, they were decidedly on the left politically. And it had a very deep impact on me growing up. And in a way, even though I grew up in a lower middle class Jewish neighborhood, I never quite fit in because of my family background and a totally different mindset, I think. Okay, partially different mindset than my peers because of my parents' experience. In June 1982, we're fast forwarding, June 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon, and I got involved in the Israel-Palestine conflict. In my youth, it was mostly the war in Vietnam, the civil rights movement. In 1982, it became Israel-Palestine. I ended up writing my doctoral dissertation at Princeton University on the theory of Zionism. And then in 1984, there was a kind of big national bestseller called From Time Immemorial, which claimed to reveal new aspects of the Israel-Palestine conflict that proved Israel was in the right and the Palestinians were in the wrong. I was still a graduate student at the time, and I demonstrated that this book, which had the endorsement of the who's who of the Jewish intellectual community back then, people like Barbara Tuchman, who you wouldn't know, Saul Bellow, the novelist, they all endorsed the book. And I am widely credited with the one exposing that it was a hoax. And from there on in, I would say, after having demonstrated that this kind of humble graduate student, proving that all the luminaries were either promoting a threadbare hoax. From there on in, I would say I encountered difficulties in my professional life.
Amazing. So despite, and you did achieve your PhD?
Yes.
Despite this, wasn't there sort of some fracas that happened where they didn't allow you back, or what happened at sort of the end of your career, academic career?
Right. I would say, speaking frankly, and believe me, at my age, I have no interest whatsoever in invoking pity. It's water under the bridge. I never had an academic career. I was in academia, it's called being an adjunct. And an adjunct basically means you're hired from semester to semester. It's the equivalent of, literally, the equivalent of a substitute teacher in a public school system, except a substitute teacher is paid significantly more than an adjunct. And I was never able to get beyond the adjunct status, except one brief period at DePaul University in Chicago, where by a concatenation of events, I managed to get on a tenure track job. But when the moment of truth came, I was denied tenure. And after that, because it was a kind of national story, when I was denied tenure, because Professor Alan Dershowitz of Harvard University Law School made a determined public attempt to stop me. There was a big editorial in the Wall Street Journal by him. He made a very public attempt to stop me. After that, that was 2008, 2007. After that, I was completely unemployed. Not even adjunct. After that, actually, I know this will come as it will seem kind of unbelievable. I literally couldn't volunteer to teach. There were places where, in high schools, a charter school, for example, in East Harlem, where the father of the principal was a friend of mine. And his daughter, the principal, was really wonderful, and she ran a tight ship. That was a darn good school. You could see just walking through the hallways. I said, I'll volunteer. No. So at that point, after the DePaul incident, I was completely blacklisted, but I never got started. The plane never left the tarmac.
Well, I do want to stress here, as I have been stressing on my show, that these schools are Soviet indoctrination camps. I implore people to read Thomas Sowell's book about inside the American education system. And what he is saying, it's perfectly into there. The point is to indoctrinate your children. And if you do not have a doctor, so to speak, that is willing to go into the classrooms and do that indoctrination, they won't let them in. And this is absolutely proof of that. Okay, so I want to sort of give the same background because you were a major piece of me waking up and realizing that I knew nothing about Gaza. Could you just unpack for people who are perhaps hearing this for the first time? I think a lot of people we've seen Israel's support has virtually collapsed, but and that's because of the behavior that's going on with the censorship has become so extreme in America. But let's actually give these people a background education like you gave me when you came on my show of what actually Gaza is, what is the history there, what happened to these people in 1948.
Obviously, within the limits of an interview, it's very hard to go through that history with any kind of...
Well, you have a book for it, so I am going to be a shameless promoter of this because we're going to give you the spark notes here, but Gaza, an inquest into its martyrdom is the title of the book that will be relevant for this. But here we're going to give you some spark notes.
Mm-hmm. Basically, if I were to try to summarize it for the purposes of this conversation, I believe the place to begin is 1948. The State of Israel is created. In the course of its creation, about 90% of the indigenous Palestinian population of Israel was expelled. About 750,000 people. Of those 750,000, about 300,000 were expelled to Gaza. And that's when Gaza kind of became Gaza. It was, right now, of the population of Gaza, about 80% are refugees from the 1948 war or descendants of those refugees. Under international law, a descendant of a refugee is still counted as a refugee. So it's 80% a refugee population. And it's also about 50% a child population. Now, from the moment Gaza came under Egyptian administration, after the 1948 war, Gaza comes under Egyptian administration. It's a very interesting fact when you start going through the history. There are all these outside observers who go into Gaza, either to work there like under the auspices of the UN, or just to see the situation. And one of the things that struck me was each time somebody goes to Gaza, they describe Gaza as a huge concentration camp. Now, this is still under Egyptian rule. So ELM Burns, the main UN official in Gaza, he writes a book Between Arab and Jew. How does he describe Gaza? He describes it as a huge concentration camp. In 1967, during the June 1967 war, Gaza comes under Israeli control. In July 1967, the father of Al Gore, the presidential candidate, his father was also a senator. So Al Gore, or Senator Gore, meaning the father, he goes to Gaza. He comes back and he testifies before the U.S. Congress. How does he describe Gaza? He says Gaza is, quote, a huge concentration camp on the sand, if you will. You now fast forward to 2002. One of Israel's leading sociologists, his name was Baruch Kimmerling, he writes a little book. The little book is called Politicide. How does he describe Gaza? He describes Gaza as, quote, the biggest concentration camp ever. 2004, the head of Israel's National Security Council. His name is Giora Eiland. He's still around. He's active now behind the scenes in the Netanyahu government. How does he describe Gaza? He describes Gaza as a huge concentration camp. Now bear in mind, this is before Israel imposed the blockade of Gaza. It was already a horror show. It's been a horror show since 1948. In 2006, Israel imposes a blockade on Gaza. It decides what goes in, it decides what goes out. It decides who goes in, it decides who goes out. They put Gaza on what they call a humanitarian minimum diet. You know what that meant? It meant they calculated, literally, we're not talking about hyperbole now, poetry. They calculated the caloric diet of everyone living in Gaza, and they admitted just enough food to avoid scenes of starvation. That was 2006. We're not talking about after October 7th. They prohibited baby chicks from going into Gaza. They prohibited chocolate from going into Gaza. They prohibited potato chips from going into Gaza. They prohibited condiments from going into Gaza. No cinnamon allowed in Gaza. Why? They wanted to create such intolerable conditions that the population of Gaza would overthrow the government that they elected.
Okay, that was very interesting. Yeah, I just hope that there's actual peace. I mean, Trump and all the other leaders a while ago said, oh, there's a peace plan, but it just doesn't look like it. And I just hope there's peace in that region, no more Israelis being unalived or Palestinians being unalived. So I hope that conflict ends. I hope all that stuff stops. Very interesting video, though, by the way, from Candace Owens. That's going to be it for this video, guys. If you guys enjoyed my videos on my channel, hit the subscribe button. Until then, see you guys on the next one. Bye.